Was there any, when you had that dream and you saw those two, Edward and Bella, was the next step, the hard step, writing the book? No. Oh, okay.
Oh, no, no. Once I got started writing, you know, at first the idea was just jot it down so I don't forget it. And then as I was writing, it was like reading the best book ever, but you were in charge. It was this really wonderful experience, and I'd always thought reading was the best thing. And then I discovered in that day that writing was just a little bit better. And so that summer, the hard part was finding time and not being too neglectful of my kids who were much younger than me. Eli was just barely 1 year old. He was tiny, and so it was this struggle between, you know, getting the potty training done and being able to jump back into this world that I was just having so much fun creating. It only took me 3 months to write Twilight because I was just in it. The hard part was the next step, because when I finished it, I honestly had never thought about publishing that whole experience. For me, this was just for me. This was my imaginary world that I was getting to shape. And my sister was the only one who knew about it. She was reading along, but no one else had any idea. Even my husband, who lived with me, had no clue what I was doing. And so I finished it.
Well, that's husbands.
Husbands, yeah. Oh, he noticed the difference, but he just thought I'd lost my mind or saying, why are you on the computer all night long? So Emily said, you've got to try and publish it. And that was the hard part, because it's scary. You have to write queries. You have to find agents. I was really, really close to quitting because I don't do scary things. And so that was the stretch for me. It wasn't the writing. It was taking that next step out.
And what was the impetus that actually got you then sitting down and writing those query letters? And
it was two things: my sister pushing me, kicking me, and she's the best. She really wanted me to try. And then the other thing was just the shock of having finished something. I had never really finished anything, so the idea that I'd completed what had to be book-length manuscript really was kind of threw me.
And was it extra? How much cutting did they have to do?
It went from being about a little bit over 130,000 words to being around 125. So we cut out about 5,000 words.
So that's not a lot.
Mostly the epilogue. That's why there are sequels, is because when I finished, I couldn't stop writing the epilogues, and they were all like over 100 pages. And I just, you know, kept going and going with the characters, and I realized I need to write more about them. I'm not ready to let go. But so we cut out a lot with the epilogue, and I think that was mostly where it got cut, a little bit towards the end, but most of it stayed a lot the same.
So is Bella based on anybody in particular?
Not really. She has a couple of things in common with me, but the way she views the world is very different from the way I do. People say, "Are you Bella?" because there are some physical, especially how I looked in high school, physical resemblances. But those were mostly because I understood the type. Like, I know how it felt in high school to be a really pale brunette, especially in Phoenix, surrounded by Barbies who had this beautiful tan all year long. And I knew how that felt, and how it felt to kind of, you know, be the wallflower. But other than that, she's very different from me. The character I'm most like internally is Edward. We really see the world in the same way.
And so Edward, I mean, how do you describe a vampire anyway? I mean,
you know, everybody has their own idea of vampires, and one of the things I found after Twilight came out, and someone told me about fan fiction, which I'd never heard of before, was that people misread him really badly in some cases, because I guess I haven't read vampire books, so I guess there's this idea of vampires are these very sensual,
the Anne Ricey kind.
I guess, you know, very, very sexual characters, and drinking blood is a very sexual act, and that was not the way I had imagined them, and nobody kind of realized how hard it was what he was doing in not killing Bella, which is what started me working on things from his version, because I just feel like he wasn't getting enough credit for how hard his life was. So hopefully when I have time to finish Edward's version of Twilight and get that out there, people will really understand him better.
And so maybe we should talk about fan fiction and what it is. You know, fan fiction sort of springs up when a group of fans, and you correct me if I'm like off on this, fans really want to take the world that you've invented and the characters that you've invented in some cases and write their own.
I think fan fiction is something that just is a natural offshoot now that we have the internet of what I was doing in my head back in high school when I was reading Anne McCaffrey's Dragons. And if the internet had existed back then in the Stone Age, I probably would have been writing fan fiction for some of those books that really captured my imagination. But I didn't realize people were doing that until someone pointed out to me, and I got online and started looking around. It's a very interesting phenomenon. It lets people, you know, participate in books in a way they didn't have an ability to do before.
Uh-huh. And in some ways it must be difficult to read those when they have taken a character that you feel so close to and not seen him the way that you...
It is, and I have stopped reading them. At first I read them out of curiosity when there were like maybe 30 stories online.
Right.
And then it's difficult because people don't get the characters right, and then you're kind of frustrated.
Right.
And then also you kind of worry that they might shape the world in a way you wouldn't want them to.
Right.
So the only ones I read now is there are a couple I follow that are based off the novels a little bit. One of my favorites, there's one about the characters being cast for a movie, and it's about the actors, and it's very cute. And there's one that's Harry Potter and the Dawning of Twilight. And it's set in the Hogwarts world where the characters are all reading Twilight, and it kills me. It's hilarious.
Oh, that sounds
it's very
like
funny.
Fun. Yeah, like something you would want to read, but you wouldn't necessarily write yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah. So do you think that your readers are mostly girls? Teen girls, or do you hear
I'd say
from...
90% female, probably 70% of them are teenagers. I don't know, maybe less than that. There's a whole group of 20-somethings and 30-somethings, and the range I've gotten is 8-year-olds to 86-year-olds. So there's a range there. Not as many male readers, but that's growing, which I like. They have a whole different experience from it. Most of them really like Jacob a lot.
Now, do you think that 8 is too young to read those books?
I think that if someone is a really precocious reader like I was, I mean, I read Gone with the Wind when I was 8. So I'm not going to make judgments on what an 8-year-old is able to read, but I do think that parents should be reading with those 8-year-olds. I read the books that were my parents' books that they had read, so they knew exactly what I was reading.
Right.
And I do think parents, especially with younger children, should be very involved in what they're reading.
Right. So what are you reading that your sons are reading?
Well, right now, my sons, they're very like their father. And I've been trying to hook my 10-year-old on reading for so long. And he's really more interested in, you know, factual things, books on bugs, and things that I was never interested in. So we're a little different, but he likes to be read too. So right now we're reading my science fiction novel that comes out in the spring. And so he's hearing The Host right now, and he's really into it. I had to read him 3 chapters before I left. He's like, "You're not going to be here for a week, so I need to know what happens."
So tell us about that new book that's coming out.
It's difficult because it doesn't feel like science fiction when you're reading it at all. It doesn't have that kind of sense of detaching from the earth the way science fiction often does. But it's about aliens, and how is it not science fiction then? So it's a real quandary for me. It's told from the perspective of an alien. It's sort of a post-body snatchers invasion that's over, and the other side won, and humans are mostly gone. And the world's a much better place. Everyone's kind to each other and nice, and bad things don't happen anymore. But there are a few humans that are still in hiding, and one of them gets caught, and my main character, Wanderer, is put into her body. And Melanie does not go away, which is what she's supposed to do. And so she and Wanderer have a really complex and interesting relationship. Once they start talking to each other, it's just really, for me, hard to step away from. And then complicating things is Melanie's boyfriend is still out there in the wild, and Wanderer, through the dreams and memories that Melanie has, falls in love with him too, and so they go off to find him together, which is a lot of fun. I tell people it's the first love triangle with only 2 bodies.
That's a good that's a good tagline. That would be great. So was that an easy book to write as well?
It was. I wasn't trying to write a book again, which happens to me a lot. I just had discovered when I was editing Twilight, I wrote Eclipse and New Moon very quickly. It was all back to back. And I started discovering that that's not always a good idea, because you edit one thing in the first book and the ripple effects through the series are amazing. And all of a sudden this whole plot line is obsolete and doesn't work anymore. And you've made a lot of work for yourself, is what I discovered. So as I'm doing this, I wanted to get started on book 4, and I thought, you know what? I have to wait until Eclipse is completely edited, or else I'm just shooting myself in the foot. So then in between editing weeks, I'd have like a month, and I was not ready to not be writing. I had the little idea, just a little glimmer of The Host. So I just started writing it down, sort of to keep track of it, you know, because you forget things, and it got bigger and bigger. Now it's the longest thing I've written.
Really?
Yeah, if it was set in the same font,
yeah.
you know, which I don't think it will, because adult books are usually smaller, it would be over 800 pages long.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a big one.